The letter arrived on a Thursday. Nell Cade knew this because Thursday was the day the post came through the Harwick Exchange, and because she had been expecting the letter for 3 weeks, which was the time she had calculated a reply from the Alderman household in the South District would take if they were going to reply at all. She had applied for the position in the second week of September. By the last week of October, she had mostly stopped expecting a response. 6 weeks without a reply usually meant the position had gone to someone else or that the household had decided not to fill it at all. And she had adjusted her thinking accordingly. The adjusting had not been difficult. That was the thing she had not let herself look at directly, which was that the adjusting had not been difficult. And the not being difficult told her something about how her thinking about the vein spread had changed across 8 months. She had set the application aside and had gone on with the work of the household, and the work had felt, in the setting aside of the application, more purely itself than it had felt in September when she was still holding the alternative at arm's length as a practical hedge against the wanting that had frightened her. She had come to manage the Vane household in February, 4 months after Rory Vane's wife had died, and 3 months after it had become clear to the district that the household needed someone to manage it. The wife had died in October, which was the month of the drive and the end of the working season and the worst possible time for a property to lose the person managing its domestic operations, and Rory Vane had managed the winter alone with Felix because he was the kind of man who managed what was in front of him regardless of what else was happening. By February, the managing had cost what it had cost, which was visible in the state of the kitchen when she arrived and in the look of a man who had been doing 2 people's work since October and who had the quality of someone running on less than the situation required. Rory Vane was 40 and ran the spread correctly and was competent at every operational aspect of a working property, and who had been, in the 4 months since his wife's death, increasingly unable to also manage the domestic side without something giving way. Not unable in the way of a man who did not care. Unable in the way of a man who was doing everything the situation required, and for whom the household had become the thing that sat just past the edge of what he could reach without the rest of it fraying. He had not advertised for someone through the district exchange. He had mentioned the situation to a neighbor whose wife knew Nell Cade, and the wife had written to Nell. And Nell had been between situations and had written back, and in February she had arrived at the Vane spread with her 2 cases and had looked at the kitchen and had started work. Rory Vane had not known what he was expecting when he arranged for someone to come. He had known what the household needed, which was someone capable who would manage it competently and allow him to be fully present to the operational side of the spread without the domestic side fraying. He had not been thinking about who the someone would be as a person, only as a function, which was the way a man thought about such arrangements when he was in the months immediately after his wife's death and was thinking about as little beyond the operational requirements as possible. Nell Cade had arrived and had looked at the kitchen in the specific way of a person assessing a situation they were about to manage, and she had started work. And within a week the kitchen had been running differently, and within a month the household had been running differently, and within 2 months Rory Vane had noticed that he was looking forward to the evenings in a way he had not looked forward to anything in 4 months, and this noticing had produced in him a wariness that he had managed privately and had not acted on. He was not a man who acted without thinking. He was a man who thought carefully about the decisions he made before he made them, and who allowed himself to come to decisions at the pace they required rather than at the pace that would have been more immediately comfortable. The pace the woodshed decision required was 8 months, and he had waited the 8 months and had stood in the woodshed on a Saturday morning and had made the decision that was most correct, which was the decision he always tried to make. Felix had been the thing she had not been prepared for. He was 11 and had his father's quality of precision and his father's quality of close observation and his father's quality of being deeply attached to the people in his vicinity without revealing this attachment in any obvious way. He had watched Nell for the first 2 weeks from a careful distance, which was the distance of a child who has learned to be cautious about new people in his household, and then he had, with no announcement, begun to include her in the operations of his daily life. He told her things. He asked her things. He appeared at the kitchen door during the hours when she was working and stood nearby doing his own work, and the standing nearby had become standing at the same table by the end of March, and by April it was simply where he worked in the afternoons. She had understood this for what it was and had been careful with it in the way that a woman who was neither his mother nor not his mother was careful, which was attentively and without overclaiming. Felix did not need someone to replace what he had lost. He needed someone to be reliably present, and reliable presence was something Nell Cade knew how to provide. 8 months later, the household ran correctly. Felix came home from school and went to the kitchen first. Rory Vane came in from the property in the evenings, and the three of them ate together at the table where Felix did his afternoon work, and where Nell had her morning coffee, and where Rory sat with his account books on the nights when the accounts needed doing. The eating together had become the shape of the day without any of them deciding it would become that shape. It had simply become it, and Nell had stopped noticing it as something that had happened and had started experiencing it as the way things were. The way things were was the thing she had not been looking at directly until September, when she had looked at it briefly and had been frightened by it and had sent the application to the Alderman household. She had done this quietly, on a morning when Felix was at school and Rory was on the South Range, in the study where the writing paper was kept. She had addressed the envelope carefully and had put it in the post on Thursday and had not mentioned it to anyone. By late October, the application had produced nothing, and she had adjusted her thinking, and the adjusting had not been difficult, and the not being difficult was where she was when the letter arrived on Thursday, and she did not receive it. The letter arrived on Thursday, and she did not receive it. She did not know this until Saturday, when she went to the post exchange herself because she had an errand in that direction and thought she would collect the week's post while she was there. The man behind the counter looked up her name and told her there had been a letter for her on Thursday and that a boy had collected it. Nell asked him to describe the boy. He described Felix. She walked home. She did not rush. She walked at her usual pace and thought about Felix the whole way, specifically about what she knew of him across 8 months and what his taking the letter said about the state of his attachment. What it said was that the attachment was deep enough to override his understanding of right and wrong, which was significant, because Felix Vane understood right and wrong with the same precision his father understood things. He had known he was doing something wrong. He had done it anyway. The something that overrode that understanding in an 11-year-old who was not a careless child was the specific fear of losing something he had become dependent on. She had been careful with his attachment. She had not encouraged it past what it naturally became and had not kept it at professional distance in the way that made children feel managed. She had been reliably present and had let the attachment grow into what it grew into, which was the attachment of a boy who needed reliable presence and had found it. She had known it was real, and had known it was consequential, and had known that what she did with it mattered more than most things she had done in this household. Felix was in the kitchen when she arrived, at the table where she worked in the mornings, with his school books open in front of him. He looked up when she came in, and his expression was the expression of a boy who had known this moment was coming and had been sitting with the knowing since Thursday and was not going to pretend otherwise now that it had arrived. She set down her basket and took off her coat and hung it and then came and sat down across from him, which was the approach of a person who was not in a rush and was not going to make this larger than it was, but who was also not going to let it be smaller than it was. She asked him where the letter was. He told her. He had put it in the woodshed, behind the spare harness on the left wall, inside a tin that used to hold nails. He said it as a person gave directions, clearly and without evasion. She did not go to the woodshed. She sat across from him and asked him why. He told her he did not want her to leave. He said it plainly, without the management that adults brought to admissions of this kind, and the plainness was the plainness of a boy who had decided to be fully honest about what he had done and why. He had found the addressed envelope in the wastepaper in the study in September. He had recognized Nell's handwriting on the envelope and had read the address and had understood what it was, a letter of application to a household in the South District. And he had said nothing about it and had watched to see if a response came. He had not known whether to hope the response would not come or to tell someone that the envelope was there. He had sat with the not knowing across 6 weeks, and by the time the response arrived on Thursday, he had decided what he was going to do about it, which was to take it. He said he understood it was wrong. He said he had known it was wrong when he was doing it. He said he had done it anyway, because he had made a calculation that was a child's calculation, which was that if the letter did not reach her, she would not know the position was offered and would not be able to accept it and would stay. She sat across the table from him and let him be fully honest about the calculation and did not diminish it or pretend it had been more sophisticated than it was. It had been a child's calculation made out of love, and it had been wrong, and he had known it was wrong, and he had confessed it to his father the morning after, which was not a child's calculation, but a person's decision, and the person he was becoming was visible in the decision. She looked at him for a long moment. Felix looked back at her with the steadiness of a boy who had decided to be honest about what he had done and was being honest about it. And the steadiness was his father's quality in an 11-year-old face. She told him that taking the letter was wrong and that she knew he understood why it was wrong and that she expected him to tell his father what he had done. Felix said he had already told his father. Nell was very quiet. She asked when. He said this morning, before his father went out to the South Range. He said his father had asked where the letter was, and he had told him, and his father had gone to the woodshed and come back and gone out to the property, and the letter would be on the counter when she looked. She turned to look at the kitchen counter. The letter was there, propped against the tin of salt, at the place where she would see it coming in from outdoors, which was where she always set things that needed to be seen. She had not seen it when she came in because she had been looking at Felix. She looked at it now. It was the envelope she had been expecting for 3 weeks, somewhat worn at the corners from having been in a tin in a woodshed and retrieved from Sam, and it had been opened and resealed, or no. It had been set against the salt tin still sealed. Rory Vane had not opened it. She could see the seal was intact. She turned back to Felix. She said that telling his father this morning was the right thing to do. He said he knew. He said he was sorry. He said it directly and without elaboration, in the way that he did the things he did, which was completely. She told him she accepted the apology and that there would be a fuller conversation about it later with his father present, and she sent him to his room to finish his schoolwork. He picked up his books without argument and went, and she heard his steps on the stairs and then the creak of his door closing, and the kitchen was quiet. She stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment. Outside the window the Vane spread was in the late afternoon light, the East Range visible, and the barn and the outbuildings, and all of it familiar now, in the way of something looked at every morning for 8 months. The day was the day it was, which was a Saturday in October, on which a letter had been hidden in a woodshed and found and placed on a counter, and which had produced a conversation with an 11-year-old boy about what he had done and why, and the boy had been honest throughout. It was not the Saturday she had expected when she woke up, but it was the Saturday that had arrived. And she was in it, and the letter was on the counter, and she had not looked at it yet. She stood in the kitchen alone for a long moment, after Felix had gone upstairs. The letter was on the counter. Rory Vane had gone to the woodshed and found it, and had brought it back and propped it against the tin of salt, and had gone out to the south range without opening it. She did not know how long she stood there before she picked it up. She stood with it in her hand, unopened, for another moment. The weight of it was ordinary, one sheet, possibly two, and she thought about what it had taken for it to travel this particular path to her hands, which was the Alderman household writing it and posting it, and it arriving on Thursday, and Felix taking it from the exchange and hiding it in a woodshed, and then telling his father on Saturday morning, and his father going to the woodshed and retrieving it and putting it here. She thought about each of those steps and what each of them meant about the people who had performed them. She opened the letter. The Alderman household was offering her the position. The letter was careful and formal and covered the terms precisely, which she appreciated, because a household that communicated clearly about terms was a household that thought clearly about how it operated. The position was the head of a domestic staff of 3, managing a household of 6 across a larger property than the Vane spread. The responsibilities were more extensive, and the compensation was meaningfully better than what she currently received, and the role carried more formal standing than her current arrangement, which was one capable woman managing a smaller operation alone. She had read through the letter with the attentiveness she brought to any document that affected how she understood her situation. And she had understood all of it, and it was a good letter from what appeared to be a good household. She set it on the counter. She read it twice. She folded it carefully and set it on the counter. She stood with it on the counter in front of her, and the kitchen around her, and Felix's school books still on the table, and the Vane spread visible through the window in the late afternoon light. She stood there for a while. She was not thinking about the Alderman household, or the position, or the terms, or what the correct decision was. She was not thinking about any of that. She was standing in the kitchen of the Vane spread on a Saturday afternoon in late October, and the kitchen was familiar and warm, and had the smell of the bread she had made that morning still faintly in it, and the school books on the table were Felix's, and the view through the window was the one she had been looking at every morning for 8 months. She understood something she had been circling without landing on, which was that the kitchen and the school books and the spread through the window were not the backdrop to her life here. They were her life here. She had stopped being a woman passing through some weeks ago, and had not noticed the stopping, because the stopping had been gradual and had not announced itself, and the not announcing was what the stopping looked like when it was real rather than performed. She was still standing there when Rory Vane came in from the South Range earlier than his usual hour, and stopped in the doorway when he saw her at the counter with the opened letter. He said her name. Nell, said the way a name sounded, when it was the name of the woman who had come in February with 2 cases and had looked at the kitchen and started work, and who had understood Felix without being told how to understand him, and who had been at the kitchen table every morning and the dinner table every evening for 8 months, and who was standing at the counter with an opened letter that offered her a different life. She said she had found the letter. He came in and set his hat on the peg and came to stand at the other end of the counter, which left the letter between them. He told her he was sorry about Felix. He said it as the thing itself, and not as a preface. His son had done something wrong, and he was sorry for it, and Felix understood it was wrong, and had understood it when he did it. And the matter had been addressed. She said she knew it had been addressed. He told her whatever she decided about the letter was her decision to make freely. He had put it on the counter because the decision was hers, and he wanted her to have what the decision required, which was the letter itself and the full knowledge of what had happened to it. He said he would not have thought less of her for whatever she chose, and he still would not. She looked at him for a long moment. She said he had gone to the woodshed himself. He said Felix had told him where it was, and yes, he had gone himself. She said he could have left it there. He was quiet briefly. He told her he had thought about leaving it there. He had stood in the woodshed with the letter in his hand and had genuinely considered leaving it there. He had held it for a while. The woodshed was cold, and the letter was light in his hand, and the considering had taken the time it took, which was several minutes of standing in the cold with a sealed envelope, while his son sat at the kitchen table, waiting to hear what he was going to do. What he was considering was a woman who stayed because her choice had been removed from her. And what he understood when he fully considered it was that a woman who stayed for that reason was not staying in the way he wanted her to stay, and he had always been clear with himself about the kind of man he wanted to be, and leaving the letter was not consistent with the kind of man he wanted to be. He wanted her to stay because she chose to. He had put the letter on the counter because her staying had to be her decision, or it was not the thing he wanted it to be. Nell was quiet for a long time. She said he wanted her to stay. He said yes. He said it plainly, the way he said the things he meant. She said that was the first time he had said it directly. He said he was saying it now. She said he had been saying it in other ways for some time. He considered this and said he supposed he had. She looked at the letter on the counter between them. She looked at the window and the spread outside and the last of the afternoon light. She looked at him. She told him the alderman household was a good position. He said it looked like a good position. She told him the terms were better than what she had here. He said he would match the terms. She said that was not what she was asking about. He said he knew. She told him she had applied for the position in September because she was frightened of what she was beginning to think about this household and about the people in it. He said he understood that. She said she was not frightened of it anymore. He said he was glad, and he meant it, and neither of them said anything else for a moment, and the kitchen was quiet around them, and the letter was on the counter between them, and Felix was upstairs. This is Dusty Vows, where a boy hid a letter because he did not want her to leave, and his father went to the woodshed and got it and put it on the counter where she would find it, because her staying had to be her choice, or it was not the thing he wanted. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then, back to the kitchen. I'm not going anywhere. She said it the way she said the things she had decided, which was plainly and without performance. She held his gaze across the kitchen counter with the opened letter between them and the vein spread outside, and Felix upstairs, and 8 months of mornings and evenings behind her. You went to the woodshed, and you gave me the letter because her staying had to be her choice, or it was not the thing you wanted. And I am not going anywhere. As if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. Rory Vane, her name for him, said the way a name sounded when it was the name of the man who had stood in a woodshed with a letter in his hand and had thought about leaving it there and had decided not to because a woman who stayed because her choice had been taken from her was not the staying he wanted. He nodded once. The letter was on the counter, and the vein spread was outside in the last of the October light, and Felix was upstairs doing his schoolwork, and the kitchen was quiet around them, and neither of them was going anywhere. The household was the household, and the evening was going to be the evening, which was the three of them at the table, and neither of them was going anywhere. Tell me, when he said her staying had to be her decision, or it was not the thing he wanted it to be, did you understand what he was telling her about what kind of staying he wanted? He did not want compliance. He did not want a woman kept in place by a missing letter. He wanted a woman who chose. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now, back to the kitchen. She had been standing at the kitchen counter with an opened letter when he came in, and the opened letter had been placed there by a man who had gone to a woodshed to retrieve it and had put it where she would find it. And the going to the woodshed and the putting it where she would find it were the same act, which was the act of a man who understood that her freedom to choose was more important than the outcome of her choosing. He had also told his son to tell her what he had done. He had not come home and arranged the letter on the counter and said nothing to Felix about what to expect. He had addressed what Felix had done directly and had told Felix that Nell needed to know the truth, and Felix had known this too. And when Nell had asked where the letter was, Felix had told her without deflection. The full honesty of that, father to son and son to Nell, was the same quality moving through two different people, and the quality was one of the things the household ran on. She had been in this household for 8 months and had learned the things about it that 8 months of close proximity taught. She had learned that Rory Vane ran his property with the consistent attention of a man who thought carefully about the decisions he made before he made them and who did not revise them afterward without good reason. She had learned that he was the kind of man who was honest about difficult things in the specific way of a person who found honesty easier than its alternative. Not because difficult things were easy for him, but because the alternative was something he had decided early on not to do. She had learned that he was the kind of father who made Felix accountable without making Felix small. She had also learned, across 8 months, that the way Rory Vane moved through his household when she was in it had changed between February and October in ways that neither of them had named. He did not change what he did. He changed how he was when he did it, in the specific way that a person changed when they had started to notice someone and had not yet said so, and had decided that the noticing was something they were going to keep to themselves until the time was right. He had kept it to himself with the same precision he brought to everything, which meant she had noticed it the same way he had kept it, which was quietly and without making it into something. She had filed it alongside the wanting that had frightened her in September and had kept working, and the working had been good work and the household had been a good household to work in. And the 8 months of quiet noticing on both their parts had produced a kitchen on a Saturday evening and a letter on the counter in the "I'm not going anywhere" that was the first direct saying of the thing, that had been present in the household for several months without being named. She thought about the September morning when she had sat at the desk in the study and had written the alderman application. She had been careful and thorough in the writing, had described her experience and her qualifications and the household management work she had done, had addressed the envelope and sealed it, and had taken it to the post that Thursday. She had done all of it with the specific intention of a woman who was creating an exit that she was not yet certain she wanted, but felt she ought to have available. The exit had not been available for 6 weeks, and across those 6 weeks, the thing she had been creating the exit against had continued and had become simply the thing, not the frightening thing, but the ordinary thing, the shape of the days. And when she had adjusted to thinking she was not going to hear from the alderman household, the adjusting had been easy, and the ease had been information she had filed without quite reading. The household had been the context in which something had developed that neither of them had been naming, and the household had also simply been the household, and both of those were true simultaneously. Felix's school books on the kitchen table were both a practical item of daily life and one of the specific things that had made the household feel like her household over 8 months. The vein spread through the kitchen window was both a working property and the view she had been looking at every morning when she made coffee. The evenings at the dinner table were both the practical close of the workday and the shape of something she had not had in any household before this one. She had not expected this when she arrived in February. She had expected to manage a household competently and to be a professional presence in it, and to do her work well, and to maintain the appropriate distance that managing someone else's household required. She had done all of those things, and the appropriate distance had narrowed over 8 months in the specific way that distance narrowed when two people were honest with each other in the daily work of a shared life, and the narrowing had produced the frightening in September, and the application to the alderman household, and the 6 weeks of silence, and then the letter on Thursday, and the woodshed, and the Saturday kitchen, and the "I'm not going anywhere." He had stood in the woodshed with the letter in his hand. He had thought about leaving it there. He had not left it there. This was the whole of his character expressed in a single decision made alone on a Saturday morning, while his son sat at the kitchen table waiting to be found out. And the character was here and was not going anywhere. She had applied for the alderman position in September when the way things were had frightened her. The frightening had been the specific frightening of a person who had begun to want something they had not planned to want, and who was not yet certain whether the wanting was wise or workable or something to be encouraged in themselves. She had applied for the position as a hedge against the wanting, a practical alternative held in reserve in case the wanting proved to be something she should not pursue. She had then mostly forgotten about the application across 6 weeks of it producing nothing, and the wanting had continued without the hedging, and by October the wanting had become simply part of how she moved through the household, and the household had become simply the household, and Rory Vane had become simply Rory Vane. And none of it was as frightening as it had been in September. She had stopped being frightened because she had stopped treating the wanting as a problem to be managed. She had looked at the way things were, and had decided the way things were was something she could let herself want, and the deciding had been quiet and internal and had not required any announcement, and the household had continued to run, and Felix had continued to appear at the kitchen door in the afternoons, and the evenings had continued to be what the evenings were. And all of it had been good. And she had not gone back to being frightened. What she had in this household was specific and was not something she had encountered in the other households she had managed. She had managed households before this one and had been competent and professional in all of them and had found the work satisfying in the way that work that was done well was satisfying. But she had not found herself in those households in the way she had found herself in this one. The finding of herself had happened gradually and without announcement, and the gradualness was what made it real. Because things that happened gradually and without announcement were things that were actually happening rather than things that were being arranged. Rory Vane had not arranged her attachment to this household. Felix had not arranged it. She had not arranged it. It had simply grown from the 8 months of daily work and daily presence and daily honesty. And it was here. And it was not something she was going to walk away from for a position in the South District with better terms and a larger household, because the thing she had here was not a thing that was replicated by taking a position elsewhere with better terms. She was 31 and had been managing other people's households since she was 24 and had done it well and had found it to be the work she was suited for and had not expected when she packed her 2 cases in February and made the journey to the Vane spread. That the work was going to find her in return. She was not going anywhere. Rory Vane was 40 and had been running his spread for 12 years and had been a widower for a year and had managed across that year with the specific competence of a man who was going to manage correctly regardless of what was happening in his interior life. And he had arrived at a Saturday evening in his kitchen with his son upstairs and his household manager at the counter with an opened letter, and he had told her plainly that he wanted her to stay. He was not going anywhere either. Neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. The alderman letter was a good letter. The position was real, and the terms were genuinely better, and it represented the kind of opportunity that a capable woman in her position did not receive often. She had read it twice at the counter and had understood precisely what it offered, which was a larger household and more formal responsibility and better pay, and a life that was different from this one. She was not going to take it. She had understood this before Rory Vane came through the door, before he said her name with the weight of 8 months in it, before he told her about the woodshed. She had understood it while standing at the counter with the letter in her hand and Felix's school books on the table behind her and the spread visible through the window in the late afternoon light. And the understanding had not been difficult. which was the same, not difficult, that had been telling her for weeks that she had already made her decision about this household and had simply been waiting for the occasion to know it clearly. The occasion had been a boy who hid a letter in a woodshed and told his father. She had told Rory she was not frightened of it anymore, and he had said he was glad, and both of those were true and were not quite the whole of what had happened in the kitchen, because the whole included the 8 months of mornings and the 8 months of evenings and the 11-year-old boy who had hidden a letter, because he did not want her to leave, and who had told his father the next morning because he understood it was wrong and was not the kind of boy who did not do the right thing when he knew what the right thing was. Felix was his father's son. He had done something wrong out of love, and had known it was wrong, and had confessed it the morning after, and had looked at Nell across the kitchen table with the steadiness of a boy who had decided to be honest about what he had done. The steadiness was Rory Vane's quality in an 11-year-old form, and the quality was here, and was going to be here, and it was one of the specific things Nell Cade was not going anywhere from. Rory Vane had stood in a woodshed with a letter in his hand and had thought about his options and had chosen the one that gave her the most freedom, and the choosing of that option was the whole of what she needed to know about the kind of man he was, and she had known it before he said a word in the kitchen, and the knowing was here and was not going anywhere. The Vane spread was outside and Felix was upstairs, and the alderman letter was on the counter, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying. And it held. She had not been going anywhere before the letter arrived. She had not been going anywhere when she was standing at the counter with the letter in her hand. She had not been going anywhere when he came through the door and said her name. The letter had been the occasion for knowing it clearly, and knowing it clearly was the whole of what the Saturday had produced, and both of them were staying, and the matter was settled, and it held. The woodshed decision was the decision that told her the most about him, but it was not the only decision that had told her things. There was the way he had come to her in March, 6 weeks after her arrival, and had said that the operation was running better than it had been, and that he could see what she had done to make it run better, and that he appreciated it. He had said this simply, and had not followed it with a discussion or an elaboration, and had not waited for a response beyond her acknowledgement, and the simplicity of the saying had been the thing that had stayed with her. Because it was the saying of a man who said what he meant and left it where it was. There was the way he had handled the conversation about Felix in April, when Felix had had a difficult week at school and had taken it out on the household in the small ways that 11-year-old boys took things out on their surroundings. Rory had spoken with Felix directly and had come to Nell afterward and had explained what he had said and had asked if she thought it was adequate. He had asked because he valued her judgment about Felix, which was not the same as asking her permission, and the distinction between the two was the kind of distinction that told you what kind of man you were dealing with. There was the way he had been in the evenings across 8 months, not performing ease or performing contentment, but simply being present at the table with his son and the woman who managed his household in the way of a man who was used to having something good and knew what it was. She had been noticing all of these things across 8 months and had been filing them alongside the wanting. And the wanting and the noticed things were the same file, and the file was full, and she was not going anywhere. Rory Vane had stood in a woodshed on a Saturday morning and had decided that her freedom to choose was more important than the outcome of her choosing. And this was the whole of what she needed to know, and also the summary of everything she had been learning across 8 months, which was that he was a man who consistently made the decision that was most correct rather than most convenient for himself. And the consistency was here, and was not going anywhere. Felix had hidden a letter and told his father the morning after. Rory had gone to the woodshed and put the letter on the counter. Nell had found it and read it and stood at the counter understanding what she already knew. And then Rory had come in from the South Range earlier than his usual hour. She did not think the early hour was coincidence. She thought he had come back early because he had been thinking about the letter all day and had wanted to be in the house when she found it, not to manage what happened when she found it, but simply to be present. The being present was his consistent mode, and it had been his mode in the kitchen on Saturday evening, and it was going to continue to be his mode. And neither of them was going anywhere. The matter was settled. The alderman letter was on the counter. Felix was upstairs having done the right thing. Rory Vane was in the kitchen having done the right thing. Nell Cade was not going anywhere. Both of them were staying, and it held. She had come to the Vane spread in February as a professional woman who managed domestic operations, and she had done that professionally and well. What she had not anticipated was Felix, and what Felix had not anticipated was how much he would attach, and what Rory Vane had not anticipated was that the woman who came to manage his household would be someone he found himself thinking about in ways that had nothing to do with the management of the household. None of them had anticipated any of it. They had each managed their own relationship to the unanticipated in the way that their natures dictated. Felix had attached and had then acted on the attachment in the specific and slightly desperate way of an 11-year-old boy, which was to take the thing that threatened the attachment and put it in a tin in the woodshed. Rory had observed his own situation and had said nothing for 8 months, and had then gone to the woodshed on a Saturday morning and made the decision that was most correct, even when it was the one that cost him most. Nell had applied for a position in September out of fright, and then had continued working, and had stopped being frightened, and had stood at a counter on a Saturday evening, understanding that she had already made her decision, and had simply been waiting to know it clearly. All three of them had handled the unanticipated in ways that were consistent with their characters, which meant that the handling was also consistent with the household, which was a household that ran on honesty and attentiveness and the willingness to do the right thing even when the right thing was harder than the alternative. She had known this about the household for 8 months. She had been part of what made the household run that way for 8 months. The running that way was one of the things she was not going anywhere from. The alderman household had offered her a position, and the position was good, and she was not going to take it. This was not a sacrifice. A sacrifice was when you gave up something you genuinely wanted for something else you also wanted. She was not giving up the alderman position. She had never truly wanted the alderman position. She had wanted an alternative to hold against what she was beginning to want here, and alternatives that you hold in reserve against things you are beginning to want are not the same as things you want, and she had understood this at the kitchen counter on a Saturday afternoon with the opened letter in her hand and the school books on the table behind her. Rory Vane was 40 and ran a spread and had an 11-year-old son and had said he wanted her to stay, plainly and directly, in the way that he said the things he meant. The saying had been the first direct saying of it, but was not the first saying of it, because he had been saying it in other ways for some months, and she had told him so, and he had said he supposed he had, and neither of them had needed to elaborate on the other ways, because both of them knew what the other ways had been. She was not going anywhere. He was not going anywhere. The household was the household, and Felix was upstairs, and the Vane spread was outside, and the alderman letter was on the counter. And all of it was here, and none of it was going anywhere. And the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. The 8 months had been 8 months of a household finding its shape, and the shape it had found was a correct shape, and the correct shape was here, and she had applied for a position in September because she was not yet ready to let herself know it was the shape she wanted, and she was ready now, and she was not going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. Felix had hidden the letter. Rory had found it. Rory had put it on the counter. She had opened it. She was not going anywhere. The chain of those 5 things was the whole of the Thursday and the Saturday that had produced the kitchen and the counter and the I'm not going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying. And it held.